Hi, I'm Steven Steers, and I am a sales consultant, speaker, and author. And I help founders and sales teams get out of their way using something called context selling. Today, it was my huge pleasure to talk about the 4 questions you need to ask yourself before you tell any stories, how to sound like an expert when your brain goes blank, your mouth gets dry, and you start to get flustered, and what I learned from street vendors in Turkey and Mexico about how to bring down people's defenses at a moment's notice. Oh, and so much more. Please stay tuned for today's episode with them.
Welcome back to part 2 of our delicious conversation with Steven Sears. He is a sales consultant, author, speaker, and has consulted and advised and led workshops for more than 600 companies in 28 countries. He's the author of a brand new book, which is called Superpower Storytelling, a tactical guide to telling the stories you need to lead, sell, and inspire. In part 1 of the show, it was just delicious. There was so much good value in there. Steven laid out the 4 questions that you need to ask really clearly to see if what you're actually telling, if the story is relevant to your audience, if it's going to land in a way that is going to really move them to where you want to get them to and have them feel what you need them to feel. We also talked about that moment that awakens in your own life, awakens you to your own ego, awakens your own, we've all got it, we've all got an ego, but awakens us to our own entitlement and what that changes and transforms in us and gives us the opportunity to find deeper meaning in our lives. We talked about a lot. I mean, honestly, if you didn't hear part 1, go back, listen to part 1. I promise you there's some just beautiful stuff in there. And listen, I always say this to you. I know you're listening twice and you're listening at twice speed or on your as you do the treadmill or whatever it might be. Go back, take notes. I promise you there's some really juicy stuff in here that you can use. So let's jump back in and let's get back on with Steven here because, you know, like I said, he walked us through these 3 types of stories. He said the mission, the vision, the milestones, and the most important one is the milestones, which often comes to these moments of confronting our own ego. You talked about these 4 questions and structuring to find out whether the story goes along. And as I said, many people have learned a lot about stories. However, people, like I said, some people feel like they're very natural storytellers and some people feel like they're not, but they know it's a skill they've got to have. And they're terrified about what happens if do I need to know this story word for word, verbatim? Do I have to get it down? Because when I try to do the story, I forget or I fluster. How do you deal with that, Steve?
I love this question. I get this one a lot too. So I actually created a framework for this exact purpose. I call it the area framework because 1, it covers all the areas you're going to need if you're ever flustered. So the other way, I also talk about this in the book. The thing is, you're going to get flustered. You're going to forget things and you're going to not necessarily know what you're talking about in some situations and you don't want to come off crazy. A quote I like is, why open your mouth and be messing this one up. Why you should close your mouth and it's better to close your mouth and be presumed a fool than to open it and remove all doubt. I don't know who said that, but I love that quote. But the area framework's really simple. It works the following ways. So it's broken down by A stands for angle. So what is your angle on a topic or situation? R, what is your reason for that angle? E is what is an example that provides some context for the angle you have. And then A is restating your angle. So I'll give you a quick example. I believe that podcasting is the best tool for building audiences. The reason I believe that is the podcast space has grown by 1 million podcasts per year for the last decade and continues without slowing down. Some examples I can give you is the Leadership and Loyalty podcast has become the top leadership podcast for Fortune 500 over the past couple of years and continues to help people to stay curious. And you should consider starting a podcast as well. And that's why I think podcasting is a great tool for building audiences. So I ran that through. So how I would say to folks, whatever your opinion is, have a kickoff statement to get into your reason is. The reason is, think about it that way. And then, for example, and that should kind of help you end your thought. One key bit, I also go into the book too, an example can be one of your personal stories.
Yes.
So it's something you know well. I believe this. Here's why I believe it. And here's an example from my own life and context. And again, using your story as a supporting point for the point you're making, which will help what? People better tell their own story. So that's what I use.
So when a person is on stage and they have forgotten in that moment though, so they're like, right? We've all had those moments, right? Where it's like, where was it? You see, if you're me, and I'm not suggesting you should do this, if you're me, if I forget where I'm doing, I just go, where was it? And I go, listen, I've just had some neurological flatulence, which is a brain fart. And if you could help me with that, where was I? I'm old. You can just tell me. And the people laugh, and I think it's one of the things that people forget is that the audience is on your side,
yes,
unless you presume they're not. And so the best way to have them on your side is to admit your flaw. Do you have a better strategy than that, or is that a good one, or you got something else to add?
I like that strategy a lot. I think it makes you the more human person. Like, it's a real guy up there. Like, I would do that. I can't believe he's even like mentioning that. Like, it endears you to people in a really important way. I actually learned from one of these coaches. I think it's Taki Moore. He does something where he gets on a phone with someone, and then he like, I don't know if he does it on purpose or not, but he's like, "Oh, I dropped my phone. Give me 1 second." Like, just adding a little bit of context. I'll be right back with you. I just dropped my phone, or I spilled something. Like, just adding a little bit more oomph, like, "Hey, I'm here." So I think it can really help people get on your team. So I think it's a good strategy. I've used it before. I have to come back to like prepare. So I'm not a type of speaker where I have to know every word. I know bullet points. Memorize your bullet points. Memorize your bullet points. I think in service of your audience, do that. I'm a big stickler for that, right? A lot of people I've worked with, they get nervous about speaking at all or telling stories. And I say there's two reasons. One is because you're afraid of being judged, right? And if you're telling a story that's helping somebody and you work through those type of worksheets and exercises, you kind of insulated yourself from the judgment because the story is about something you want to teach them. So that gives you one. And the second is you're unprepared. One of those we have a lot of control over. So I'm a big stickler of being more prepared. Learn the bullet points. The other thing I would add to that, though, is I think acknowledgement is key. Mm-hmm. And if you're able to, like I do stand-up comedy too. So I write a set list and I will put it on the floor on stage in big block letters so I know what beats I'm going to hit. Or if I have a glass of water, I would put it next to the glass of water and I would go then get a glass of water and then have a quick look and catch where I'm at. Right. The other thing, when I was a child, I was accepted into Juilliard as a kid to do percussion. So we would have, this is when I was probably, like the late 90s. So I got complete training in like 60 different percussion instruments, private lessons. Some family provided the grant for me to do this, which was an incredible opportunity. And I had to give a marimba solo, and Air by Bach was the piece that I played. I learned it on piano when I was like 5, and then I was finally like 10 or 12 years old playing it in front of people, and I made a mistake. And my teacher commented afterwards, he's like, "I thought you made a mistake, but you did the best thing you could do." I was like, "What did I do?" He's like, "You took a deep breath and you settled yourself and you came back." So nobody besides me and you knew that you made a mistake. They just thought it was a rest. Right. So I think besides having a set list and better preparation, if you do get flustered, take a pause. Because it feels like an hour to you, but that really more than anything just denotes gravitas, I think. And I think that's one of the ways that's how I would do it anyway.
And that's one of the things about storytelling that I think that most of us forget. You and I had a conversation a while back, and I talked about that I had done an amateur night of comedy, and I talked the guy into giving me not 7 minutes, but 15. And I wrote 15-minute set and delivered it in 7 minutes because I didn't pause. I didn't give anybody time to laugh. I was so busy trying to get it out. And I think that oftentimes new speakers or people telling stories, they rush through it and don't give people the time to feel, or
Yes.
so they can laugh or cry or whatever it is, but to feel. And as you said, that pause is gravitas. It's important. Let's talk about one strategy that I know is different about the way you teach storytelling, that I think, like I said at the intro, I think that most other people in this it doesn't even consider it. And I used it in the intro when I talked about the armpits, which is pattern interrupts. Tell us about let the audience know what a pattern interrupt is and why it's so powerful. Because it is.
Yeah. So, dang, sorry if that was loud in your ears, but you weren't expecting it. Now you're looking around to see what happened. That's an example of a pattern interrupt. Why is this important? The brain is wired to look for very specific patterns, and the brain likes to forget things. It's forced to remember things that are important or to look at notable events because, well, we're still animals, as highly evolved as we may be, or lack of evolution as we have. And the animal brain wants to look for different patterns so that it can know if it is safe or it is okay to move forward. Most basic neural situation. I'll give you a quick example of where this really sunk in for me, and I write about this in the book. I was in Istanbul, Turkey, teaching some workshops to Turkish entrepreneurs. I got a great opportunity to go over there. I was there for maybe about a week, right before things kicked off in 2020. I missed the travel ban by 3 days. So would have been a wild time. Life would be very different. But anyway, I'm there in Turkey, and there's this neighborhood in Turkey called the Galata Tower Square. It's a tower that was built in, I believe, the 1300s by the Ottomans in order to stave off I'm neglecting the fact here, but it was built in order to be a watchtower to prevent them from getting invaded. And Byzantine, and they eventually got invaded. So, that worked very well. But it's a lot of history in this thing. A guy actually jumped off the top of the tower with wings that he made and flew 4 miles, right? Way before the Wright brothers. So it's a lot of history. It was a prison. It was a outpost. Very interesting. And you could feel the age of this place. And you can tell it's very old because if you've ever been to Madrid as well, the streets are very narrow. They're not built for cars because there weren't cars, right? Maybe you have a horse carriage or otherwise. This neighborhood is no exception. It's very winding and hilly and very small streets. And I had a day off before I was going to go back into work. And I was like, let's go explore. Beautiful Istanbul, Turkey. Please go check it out. People are lovely. Food is even better. Walking up this thing, and I see a guy with his shoe shine box. He's coming down the hill in my direction. And shortly after he passes me, his brush just falls out of his container. And I look at it and I'm kind of in a rush. And I'm like, oh man, golden rule it though. Like my parents taught me, if I drop something, I want somebody to say something. So I call after him, my terrible Turkish, like I think I said merhaba, which is hello. It's the only thing I know. And the guy like spins on a dime and looks, and I was like, dropped it. So he runs over, like almost tearing up, and he's like, oh, very broken English. You saved my business. I feed my family with the shoe shine. I shine your shoes. And I was like, no, I'm good. And I start walking away. He blocks me. He's like, no, it's a point of honor. I shine your shoes for free. I was like, no, I'm good. And as I go to move out of his way again, strangely, somebody on the 4th floor at the kitty corner where I'm standing yells out in English, you always bother the tourists and make them tip you after you shine their shoes. I was like, huh, wow, fascinating. And my sales and storytelling brain is ticking over because what he did there was he played on the fact that I want to be a virtuous and reasonable person. All of the context that got me to that point, my parents building me and instilling me with character and the golden rule and the things that I learned were all right there in that. And it's like, oh, I want to be a good person. Let me give this back to him. And so he capitalized on the story I tell about myself in order to get a lead so he could shine shoes. And I didn't want to shine my shoes. I had Vans on. Like, what do I need with a shoe shine anyway? But that just got me thinking. It's like he really disrupted the pattern of how I'm moving around in the world and got my attention. Other great examples, and I love to go around the world and see how people sell because the way they interrupt patterns is awesome, right? So I lived in Playa del Carmen, Mexico for a bit over a year and a half.
Came out special, blue light special.
You know what it is. You know exactly what it is. You do.
Exactly what it is. I was like, what?
Yep. And there's, as Dub knows, there's tons of street vendors there. They're selling and pitching everything that they can, and most of the pitches are very similar. But I have a couple examples that were just so memorable where, somebody's coming up to you, like whatever, they're like, hey, they want to sell something. The guy's like, hey, can you just give me 2 minutes so I can rip you off? And you just start laughing. And then now he's got your attention.
Yeah.
Or another time I was riding on a bike and a guy like pointed like behind me, and I look around and he like puts his hand out in front of the bike and then points it into his shop. And I just start laughing. Right? And then another time I'm looking down the street and this guy sees me looking around and he just pops around the corner. He's like, buddy, I don't know what you're looking for, but I got it. Right? They just mess with you. And I think what it does is it just gives you a reason to let your guard down so that you can approach whatever the thing is. And again, I said no to light share these things, but look, I wrote them down because I'm like, that's great. Look what you're doing. It's going to work. And so I think the importance to the pattern interrupt, to like sum it up here, especially now, everything is the same.
Exactly.
Everybody's doing the same thing, saying the same thing, the same way on the same platform, using the same tool, ChatGPT, if you're wondering what it is, to try and be different, just like everyone else. And I think leveraging a thing like the pattern interrupt, and a way to do that, like let's say you have a milestone story, start at the incisive moment. Start with the bang. Start with my back is broken in 17 places. Huh? Here's how we got here. And then you could start the story over. But pattern interrupts your friend.
What's his name? The movie director.
Christopher Memento.
Yeah, it's you start with this moment and it's like, what the hell is going on? And then you explain it from there. Pattern interrupts are fabulous, as you said, because they lower the guard, and particularly if you can do it with something that is comedic. I mean, I'm here in Vancouver and walking down Robson Street, the main shopping street, and I go into this particular restaurant that has an outdoor area. I'm sitting there, and I'm watching this guy come up, and he's asking people, you got a quarter, whatever it is. And, people are just like, piss off, you're bugging me. I'm trying to have dinner. And then probably 15 minutes later, another guy comes up and he goes, excuse me, do you have $237.14? And it was like cracked up, right? It was so specific, so random that everybody cracked up and we started all giving him money.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the key, is that it's why it's important to lower that guard on people, because we're all so bombarded all the time. And, one of the things that happened, I said, like, if I say I've got a neurological flatulence, it's like, what is that? They have to think for a minute. What does that mean? Right. But it's like, that's it. Another one is, I'll simply say, and they go, what? And I just wait, right? Like I've said something they should understand, right? And I go, by the way, I had no idea where I was, and I just used that to help me bring myself back. And it's like that moment of cracking up allows people to let their own guard down. Because as you said, everybody's on guard. Everybody's trying to sell you something. Everybody's doing their spiel. And nobody wants to be spieled. We want connection. And this is the key piece that I think that most storytelling falls short on, is the purpose of the story is to connect with another human being. It's to have them see themselves in you, in your story, or to see their story in your story. Like I said, that, the multiplex, to give them that sense that we're not that different. Here's this guy who looks very different than me. He's not quite as tanned as me. His hair's a bit straighter than mine. Whatever it is, and yet we've got this thing in common. This commonality that brings us together. this moment of a conversation with my mother, this moment of a conversation with my child, this moment of a incident that was like awakening. And that I just love the way you do that, in a way that you've laid that out beautifully in the book for people to really, really grasp. And I think that in doing that, you approach storytelling from solving rather than selling.
Yes.
Talk to us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, part of my mission is to remove sales from being a 4-letter word. So I don't.
It's cheesy. I mean, we think about it, right?
It's like
some nasty guy with a mustache,
nasty.
a bad pair of plaid jacket on.
I'm going to get you in this today.
Most of our ads.
Oh, and for good reason, right? They're sleazy. They're doing tactics to try to manipulate you into doing something you don't want to do, 100%. And one, that's not my style. I think it's gross as well. But again, if we're approaching it from a problem point of view, is this a problem you experience? Then there's some parity there, and then we could talk about that problem. And again, another thing I talk about in training people on is kind of how to run calls so that you aren't solving and not selling. If I can solve your problem, we could talk about how I could do that. If I can't, I'm going to let you know I can't do that, and we can go our separate ways. And if I have resources, I'll put you in the right direction. But a lot of it is just helping people set their guard down. I'm not here to sell you anything, because I don't know if I could solve any problems you have. I'm here to understand if there is something here, if there's a there, we could talk about how we can go there together and bring you to here, right? Yes. But I think that type of mentality is something I want to see more of, because it's just so gross, some of these tactics people use to try and move units. And then the person buys something and then they don't feel good about it. And then that carries on to everything else. And then when they show up to another interaction, they bring that trauma with them in some way. And I think I want to dispel as much of that as is possible. So I think that's the first piece. But as far as solving and not selling, like, a story will help people see the lesson, right? So there's a reason the Bible, the Quran, and the Torah are some of the most popular and well-revered books through the centuries. They give and provide lessons in the form of stories. So you understand how to act, how to approach, and what to do just by remembering the story, even if there aren't implicit instructions. A good story and a good sale, if you will, helps somebody tell that story. And the logical next chapter is, well, you know what, maybe I should actually work with Dove and his wife to be able to speak better, because they understand where I'm at. They've been where I want to go, and they are the best steward and mentor to help me get to the place that we both agree I need to get to. And that's all it's about.
So for you, just coming back to you for a moment, you know, you said that you got his Juilliard. You said that you, which is an amazing accomplishment, that you left school with a degree and no job. Where did this infatuation with storytelling become? Because this is not just something you do; it's something you are embedded in. You eat it, sleep it, leave it, breathe it.
Yeah, I think it started at a very young age. So I'm a child of Jamaican parents. Both my parents born and raised in Jamaica, West Indies. Shout out to my Jamaicans if you're listening. And Ross Claude. Yeah, sorry, Mom. But like a lot of immigrants, our families from immigrant parents, we didn't come from much. You know, we come from humble beginnings, but we had love in our home, and which I'm eternally grateful for. We weren't allowed to watch television during the week, maybe on the weekends, you know, and we would hustle to do that right from 3 or 4 o'clock on Friday to 7 p.m. on Sunday. We could kind of watch some TV and we would do it. The only other things we could do are play our instruments, which got a little boring after you sitting there for a while, or we could play with our toys and listen to the golden age of radio. So for those that don't know, the golden age of radio was before television, where there would be shows on in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. That would be Westerns, detective shows, suspense shows, or whatever. And these brilliant writers would conjure complete and full worlds just by having people sit in a room and talk to each other with a Foley artist making noise.
You're way too young for this, man.
I mean, but it's
But this is why Jamaica is the place.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you would have been living in America at that time, you would have been already fully into the TV world. But, because you're not old, you're a young man, that sort of world had already moved on by a decade.
Long time.
You were in that. And you were getting audio dramas.
Yep. Like I give that all to my parents. They're like, hey, listen to this. And just the vocabulary I was able to get, the context for stories, the heartbreak and the pain and all these other things. Like I would take these stories, and there's a couple I really like. I love the detective ones, Pat Novak for Hire, Richard Diamond. I love Gunsmoke. It's one of the best shows of all time, I think. Great sound effects, great storylines, everything. But the stories, there's one Letter from Cynthia by a show called The Whistler. It was a suspense program. And this one just broke my heart. Like, if you check it out, I think it's on the Internet Archive. You could download this if you're curious to hear the story. But it just ends so abruptly, and I was just broken by the story. I still remember it. And the story is basically about a guy who breaks up with his love of his life, and then she marries somebody else, and then he's a doctor, and then that guy and her were in a car accident, and he's the attending physician. It's about what is he going to do? Like, he could easily get his revenge, right?
Right.
What does he do, right? I won't spoil the story.
No.
But I remember taking that story, and I was like, I would just be so inspired to play with my Legos and build what would happen next in the scene. Like, it wasn't over.
Right.
Right. So something I also say to people is stories may close the sale, but they never close the conversation.
Oh, I love that.
So what I think is really important and implicit in that, where that comes from, it's like, oh no, like this could have happened here. Like, what happened? It never ended. I want to know what happened. I want to see what happened. I want to build what happens next. And I think where you and I are definitely simpatico here is I'm curious about life. Mm-hmm. Stories help me be more curious. Where else can I see that pattern? How can I disrupt that pattern and add a new flavor or detail? And the more places I've traveled, I've been fortunate to travel and live in a bunch of different countries. A lot of the things are the same because I understand the broader context of what things are looking like and how those stories all intersect. And I 100% give full credit to my parents for putting me in those positions and giving me character and substance and not making it easy for me, because that gave me a chance to really understand what I want to do and how I want to live. And shout out to my mom and dad. They're awesome. I love them very much.
Yeah. I think there's two very interesting arts. One is the art of the long form story. And then there's the art of the very short form story, which is extremely difficult.
That was hard.
To complete a story, in 60, 90 seconds or 30 seconds, or something. It's like, wow. I mean, that's magnificent. But to also complete a story in an hour that has twisted and turned and kept you when you normally would have drifted away is just magnificent. And what a skill set, because one of the things about story, it's Stephen talking about this, the arc of a story. And the thing to learn about this is when you actually learn, you go through Stephen's book and you walk through those steps. As you walk through those steps, here's what I want you to know. You can walk through those steps and deliver a 3-minute story. Sure, you can. But you can walk through those steps and deliver a 3-day workshop. You can pull that same thread through a 3-day training in whatever it is you're training people in by understanding that it is a thread, and how do you pull that thread and entice people into the next part of it. That's the key. That's the juice of it. It's like, well, what next? I got to know. And sometimes I'm not going to tell you. Sometimes you got to tune in next week to find out.
Got to tune in next week. There's a website. I think it's taken down now. I just looked it up. But I think you can get it on the Internet Archives. And it was called onesentence.org. It was true stories told in one sentence.
Onesentence.org?
Onesentence.org. I think that it's archived now. I think you can find the archive of it, but it's people just telling a story in one pithy, very clear sentence. And again, some of these will just break your heart. And I think if you're curious about stories or being really, really short and concise, as I think it's Mark Twain says, if I had more time, I'd have written you a shorter letter. That's an exercise in the brevity that people can have. And I think you'll get something out of it.
We're getting very close to the end of part 2 of the show. And so I'm going to ask you, I know you have a favorite quote. What is it? Tell us why it's your favorite quote.
Yeah. My favorite quote is by Giacomo Casanova, who's the Casanova of fame that everyone's heard of, but it isn't a quote that's about any of the things he's most known for, at least in the context that I apply it. And it goes the following. It says, I have always believed that when a man gets it in his head to accomplish something and occupies himself completely in that design, he shall succeed whatever the difficulties. And so I think if we go back to the oil spill story, we go back to life as an entrepreneur, which is some of the darkest and most horrible times you could experience, but it does build a massive amounts of character. Again, I wouldn't change it. Just having that very clear focus of like, no, I want this. This is what I'm going for. This is my mission. This is my vision for my life. Makes it all much simpler. And I think if you take a long enough time horizon with things, right? I think I only learned this really, really in action in the last 5 years, where it's like, do this thing every day for the next 5 years, check in. If you still want to do it, continue it for another 5 years. You'll be one of the best to ever do anything because everyone else quits. And I think if it becomes you, right? Habits are success. It is not the result. It is, I am this person. I have these habits. My habits define who I am and where I'm going. I think that quote clearly encapsulates the type of man I've always wanted to be and the man I work on being every day. And in some parts, in some ways, the man I am today as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great quote and a great way of putting it. I would challenge people to consider this. If you have a goal, and no doubt you do, if you have a goal and you will not be changed in the pursuit of that goal, it's the wrong goal. The purpose of the goal is not achieving it. The purpose of the goal is being transformed by pursuing it. That's what makes the difference. And that's what makes the story worth telling.
Amen.
Stephen, it's been a pleasure and an honor, sir. Thank you so much for being with us. I hope you'll stay with us to the end. But before we do, please tell people where they can find out more about you, about the book, and all your wonderful resources.
Again, thank you so much for having me, Dov. It is a pleasure to speak with you anytime I can. And I'm grateful that I get to share this with you and your audience. You can find information about me at stevensteers.com. You want to get the advanced copy of the book, stevensteers.com/superpower storytelling book. I have a litany of resources there that are designed to help you tell better stories, be better at presenting, and just generally be you in whatever it is that you do. So check that out if you want to. You can get me on any social at @stevensteers_. I'm there. I'm the guy with the hair, in case you're wondering. And it has been a pleasure to be able to share some of this with you today. And please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe and share this with somebody who could resonate with it. And review this podcast too, because this enables Dov to continue to do the work he's doing by sharing great stories with everybody. So please make sure to do that as well. Thanks again for having me.
Sincerely appreciate that, Stephen. Thank you so much. And for you, remember, those who control the meaning for the tribe also control the movement of the tribe, whether it's business or politics. If you're committed to positively shaping the behavior, the landscape, you got to tap into what drives human behavior, and that is the emotional source code. I am Dov Baron. I show businesses, teams, and leaders how to harness their emotional source code to move their tribe, because unified actualized meaning is the single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for all individuals and companies. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Like I said, really appreciate it when you rate, review, and subscribe and share the show. Like Stephen said, it really makes a huge difference. We do appreciate it. Till next time, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about the stories you haven't told. Now take a look at those stories and ask yourself, why haven't I told them? Maybe you're embarrassed, or maybe that's the right reason to tell it. Maybe your embarrassment story is the story that will move somebody else from being stuck. I got some really embarrassing stories that have changed people's lives. So have you. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deepest meaning to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, in your life, and in your leadership impact. And I am out.